Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'il mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, we are continuing this development of the Pi-CBT tools, and we are talking about the nature of inner speech and how we're going to harness inner speech to develop a very powerful antidote towards psychological problems. But as we face this life in the 21st century, we have also go back to the historical context in which we are talking about the molding of the mind and the brain of 21st century civilization, how it come about and why we are in this current state. In the sense that you can see in very much developed countries, they have no problem of poverty, no problem of food, clothing, shelter, and so on. Yet, you have a very high rate of suicide, you have a very high rate of anxiety, depression, and the whole spectrum of psychological problems. So why this is so? We have to go back to historical context, because over the 18th, 19th century, we have philosophers, for example, developing this whole idea of existentialism. It is a secular materialistic idea of life in which you have no commitment to God. You just have this commitment to yourself and even no commitment to society, because it is the ego of the self that is prevalent. That's why you have psychotherapy developed by Freud, in which his whole idea of life is based centered on sexual deprivation. And this whole ego and id idea boils down to the idea of a secular person without any meaning or purpose in life. So they are molding, these people are molding, and especially based on the idea of Newtonian physics. We have taken up this idea, and Darwinianism, this whole philosophical framework of existentialism become part and parcel of the whole worldview. So this worldview then develop your inner speech or your automatic thoughts. Your automatic thoughts would not then have any reference point now. So 21st century humanity do not have a reference point. For traditional Muslim society, we have a reference point. Our reference point is Allah, God. And we know that Allah is the creator of this universe, that this earth is just one little teeny-weeny atom in the scheme of the physical world. It's even the physical world. You're not talking about the realm of the spiritual world. This physical existence alone is so teeny-weeny that it has no reality in its sense. So we have a reference point. We have a sense of commitment. We have a sense of reference. We have a sense of reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because of that, our inner speech, regardless of whatever is the situation that we face in life, is radically different from the 21st century humanity. Unfortunately, the whole world today is being westernized. So the whole idea of secular, materialistic, existential existence on this life is now a worldview in the 21st century. And this worldview will cause a lot of problems in terms of psychological makeup of humanity in the 21st century, including Muslims. So we have, for example, if you look at the Muslim society, maybe 70 to 80% are nominal Muslims. They don't pray, they don't fast, they only know some basic ideas of Islam. So their whole worldview is being shaped by this secular, materialistic, existential idea. And because of that, they will face exactly the same situation as we face today. So if you look at the current problems now, the whole idea of automatic thoughts in speech even now is being attacked by a lot of situational conditions in the 21st century. For example, we are talking about addiction. Now, addiction is a major problem. You have addiction to drugs. This is going out of hand. All right? So people are addicted to all kind of both natural and synthetic drugs, which is causing a lot of mental problems, suicide, as well as not being able to function in society. You have addiction to pornography, you have addiction to video games, you have addiction to online, and this is causing a lot of change in terms of automatic thoughts and inner speech, because our automatic thoughts and inner speech will be molded by how our brain is being shaped. Because if, for example, now research are showing that if you are addicted to pornography or you are addicted to drugs, you have a shrinkage in terms of your hippocampus, and your amygdala is always on the alert, is always on the fight or flight response, especially if you're addicted to online violent games. So you cannot have a rest state. And over time, you will have, your frontal cortex will be smaller. So you lose sense of, you don't have any sense of empathy. Your sense of empathy is being decreased, because every day if you see these violent online games of killing and blood splattering all over the place, you are desensitized. And when you're desensitized, you do not feel that feeling. So the future of this inner speech is of these children who are growing up with this kind of addiction to video game or pornography or any of those online thing, would be they will have a shrinkage in their frontal cortex. They will also have a shrinkage in the hippocampus, and they will always have this sense of anxiety or fear, which is built in because of the nonsensical input that is imprinted into their mind every hour of the day in all these nonsensical, violent or sexually abusive games. And because of this, you have a major problem facing humanity in the 21st and the 22nd century. That is what we cannot avoid. So what is important is that your input, again, from your negative, I'm talking about the negative, your negative physical environment, your social, intrasocial environment, which result in addiction, whether it is online addiction, video game addiction, pornographic addiction, and all other kind of addiction, drugs and so on, will then impact your inner speech. And you will then absorb, from our Islamic perspective, you'll absorb this realm of waswasa, the evil. And then you will always constantly be in anxiety and in depression. This is a constant way of life. And in fact, some studies have shown that the children that is growing up today, so exposed to all this kind of drugs and video addiction and so on, is becoming more like a very desensitized human being with Asperger's syndrome. So they have become SPs. And this is terrible. That means they are not even sensitive to their own parents. And they are living in their own little world because your brain cells are being shaped by this inner speech. Previously, they don't have this idea. Now we know this realm of shaitan, the waswasa, that is imprinted into your mind, especially into your brain cells, and your brain will then cause you to become a different human being. All right? And that human being is insensitive, no empathy, no compassion, no mercy, living in their own little world, having this idea that everything is only important to him or herself and not to anybody else. And that will be a disaster in terms of the psychology of humanity. I'm not talking about you and I'm talking about this future generation 10, 15, 20 years ago, when they're brought up with all these gadgets, they lose their sense of being, the sense of presence as a human being. It is very sad, but we will have to face them, like it or not. So we have to prepare the ummah. This ummah must be nurtured with positive inner speech. That means we must develop a strong family ties that we build in our positive physical environment and intra and intersocial environment within the Muslim family. And then we give them this idea of reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in whatever small measure that we can. Always giving them this input, because then there can be an antidote to the negative environment, the waswasa, the katir shaitani, the whispering, the greed of the world, excessive appetite, sexual desire, prompting self, evil day prompting self, nafsu ammara, psychological disorder that is going to affect all humanity, like it or not. This trend is very clear, but I'm just giving you this understanding that whatever that we input into our mind, at the E, our M and S, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical, the E aspect or the cult aspect is the feelings aspect, all right? F, E, the emotional aspect together, and the physical self, the brain cells will then become the FET cycle, which I've explained earlier on. And within this framework, our framework would be a more holistic approach towards resolving this idea of how we can generate positive inner speech so that we can generate a positive human being becoming the true and sincere servant of Allah, striving to make ourselves good, helping others to be good, and making the world good, and making this life a life that is beautiful, wonderful, full of peace, love, happiness, empathy, compassion. That is the right of every human being, inshallah.